Little background, Proteus CMMS is our flagship product. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years now, with constant updates pretty much taking place on a regular basis. What we're looking at here is the login screen for the application. The way Proteus CMMS handles its authentication is controlled entirely through Proteus CMMS. So as a user or maintenance manager, there's no need to go to your IT team or any third party to create your users and change passwords, do whatever maintenance tasks you need to do with the logins. We also, in this screen, have available a service request function. And what that will do is allow your shop floor personnel to go ahead and enter a request for maintenance that might occur without necessarily having to have a full-on login to the application. So they can come through, fill out these fields, and that then gets submitted as a maintenance request. And then you as the administrator can go in and approve or decline that request at a later date. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our login screen here. Give me a minute here. Keep in mind during this demo, I'm going to be logged in as the administrator user. And the reason I want to bring that up is because while we're going through some of these screens, you might see a load of extraneous fields and functions that you would not necessarily see as a normal user. But I want to give you the full overview of what is available, just so you can see what's out there. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Oh, it's going to make me reset my password. Okay. So there you saw one of the features. We do have password expiration. And after you log in, you're going to be taken directly to what is essentially your personalized homepage. First thing you notice here is there's a couple of performance indicators that pop up, so you can get a top-down view of what's going on in your organization. For example, here you can see work orders that are overdue or completed but not closed. Get yourself sort of a weekly overview here in this chart. And down below, we also have a message board where teams who are using Proteus CMMS can exchange messages, for example, like between shifts or something like that. If information needs to be exchanged between workers in Proteus, you can use the message board. We also see down here the My Work Orders panel, which is going to show only those work orders that apply to you. And just for a bit of definition, a work order is any active work that needs to get done. And that's going to become a little more clear later as we get into these different areas above here. We have active work orders and then work order masters, which act as templates. And that would be to accommodate your preventive maintenance or scheduled maintenance needs. You'd set up a work order master, put a schedule to it, and then it would activate itself based on whatever schedule you assign. In a nutshell, all of the menu items that you see above here are all present to help you perform work orders in one form or another. For example, if we take a look at the assets menu, we have assets and asset systems. The assets are one of the primary things that you would be performing maintenance upon. So that would be physical things like air handling equipment, manufacturing equipment, physical hard assets that you'd be performing work orders on. We call those targets in the system because you can also do work orders against a particular location like a room or a floor. Asset systems are used to group your assets together so that if you have a scenario such as a assembly line, you can group all of your assets into one big thing and perform a work order against that. So it just allows you to organize your assets a little bit better and perform the work in a way that makes sense. The inventory menu is designed to allow you to create a spare parts inventory, again, for use on work orders. And this allows you to add parts and then subdivide those parts into different stock rooms. So if you have 4 or 5 stock rooms scattered around your different facilities, you can organize it in a way that will make sense. And in turn, those parts then, again, get used on work orders, and the cost of those parts becomes part of the permanent cost history of the asset that you've done the work on. So the parts become your material cost. You can organize your parts into bill of materials. If you have a piece of equipment that you want to track the entire bill of materials on, you can make that list and add those parts to the bill of material and then associate to the asset. Personnel is the employees, okay? So this would be the employees or the labor, again, used on work orders. So what you can do is set up your employee records with as much or as little detail as you want, and then you would assign those employees a labor craft where the rate is applied to the craft. So if, for example, you have an electrician, you can assign a expense rate to that craft and assign it to that employee. And then based on the number of hours worked, that will be the labor cost on your work order. The next 2 menu items are providers and purchasing, and these both deal with how you would restock or purchase your parts. So purchasing allows you to set up actual purchase orders, requisitions, and these are really pretty flexible. You can create a purchase order directly, or you can create a requisition first. It really depends on how you want to use the purchasing function. We have also what is called purchasing escalation. So if you get into a situation where you have to have higher up approve a purchase order before it can be issued, you can set it up using this escalation function. And I also want to point out the history function. You'll be seeing these history files in some of the areas to come. Almost everything that you would do in Preventive CMMS has some type of a history associated to it. And what that is a log of what was done in the past. So if you create a purchase order and go through the whole process of receiving the parts and taking the parts in inventory and closing that purchase order out, that'll get placed into purchasing history basically forever until someone comes in and actually purges it. So like if you don't want to keep records past a certain point, you can purge it, but none of the history can be changed. So once it's in history, it's there, it's fixed. Actually, let me jump back here to providers a bit here. Providers are any entity that you would buy goods or services from, according to Preventive CMMS. So contractors would be companies that you would purchase services from. So for example, like an HVAC company that would come in and do work on your HVAC systems, any third-party contractors. The vendors are those companies that you'd buy your parts from or goods from. So vendors get associated back to your parts, and then you can purchase those parts through the purchasing module here. Take a quick look at the reports menu, and I might open up 1 or 2 of these a little bit later on in the session here. We have about 80 or so standard reports that come with the application. Anything from asset list to location reports, your purchasing history reports, and a lot of different reports related to the creation, closing, and history of your work orders. The reason I want to point these out is these are done in a tool called Crystal Reports. So that allows a great deal of customization that you can do with these reports. If you happen to have the Crystal Reports program, you can modify these reports on your own. and then basically place them within the system to replace the standard reports. You can also create custom reports out of basically from whole cloth, a brand new report, and that would be basically anything in the system that you want to see, as Crystal reports will read whatever data that you've put into Proteus. And once you upload that file, you can run it right through Proteus MMX. Okay, so now we're getting into more of the work order area, and I will dive into this a little bit more in depth. Service requests are, again, a way for people on the shop floor to generate a request for maintenance that doesn't necessarily require them to log into the main application like we are right now. So these would come from the shop floor, and then I, as an administrator, can come into this area and then approve or decline these requests. So here's some examples of that. And this is a good time to actually kind of go over some of the more common elements of the program. What you're looking at here on the left-hand side is a list of locations that have been set up in this demo system. What you're looking at the top level here is a facility, and we can drill down to, I believe, sites, buildings, floors, rooms, and areas. Those are the general categories we have, but you can really use those any way you want to represent anything you want. So I'm trying to see if I can find a good example here with a lot of the different elements in place. This is a decent one here. So here we're looking at an airport. We have the concourse building, and this would be representative of a room. So concourse building 000, and the mechanical room is down below here. It's actually mislabeled, that's an area. But you saw how that would affect the list on the right-hand side as soon as I click on any of these locations. So what that does is it filters your list of items, in this case service requests, to whatever area you've clicked. And this becomes important as well in that you can actually segregate your data based on these different facilities. And it's all done through permissions. So if you have, let's say, 2 divisions that are going to be using Proteus MMX, you can set it up in such a way that one division will not be able to see the other division's data. And that philosophy carries out throughout the whole application. So nobody's going to be able to see anything else that does not belong to them, be that your assets, your inventory, personnel, anything in the system. It can be segregated based on facilities. This grid on the right-hand side is also common throughout the whole program. Wherever you go, or most places I should say, you're going to see this grid. And what that is a list of available items that relate to where you are. So I'm in service request right now. So if I go back up to the top level here, I'll see a list of all service requests. All right. So this is going to be omnipresent throughout the whole application. The only thing that's going to be changing up here are some of the functions that you can do with this data. In this case, again, since I'm looking at a request, I can accept it or reject it, edit it, or even create a new one. Okay. So with these service requests, again, you have the option to accept. And if I were to accept a service request, what that would do is create a brand new active work order. And I should point out, you don't have to use service requests if it's not something you're interested in. You can create work orders directly without going through this intermediate step. So that would take us to work orders. Basically, the focus of the entire application is, again, funneled down to work orders. Specifically, we're trying to get you to create work order masters and use preventive maintenance scheduling as opposed to doing emergency demand work orders in the system, because that's where ultimately the money saving will come in if you get into a good PM routine. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up the work orders page. And here are those work orders that have been activated in the past. So you can see we have two different types listed here. We have preventive maintenance and demand maintenance. Preventive maintenance would be the scheduled work orders that you'd be doing. In other words, these are generated based on a schedule that you'd set up here under your work order masters. So these are recurring. They pop up every so often, let's say every 3 months, every 2 weeks, whatever it is that you happen to have the schedule set for. Below that, we have an example of a demand maintenance or break fix work order. All right, so this would be a work order where something broke out in the shop or in your building, and you have to go and fix it. So let's take a quick look at that and show you some of the features available with this. And like I said way at the beginning, you're going to be seeing a lot of different things here that you would not necessarily see as a normal user. And one of those are these user fields that you see below. These are here for your use if our normal standard fields don't cover all the information that you need. So let's say you need a particular piece of data that's not covered by one of the labels that we have here. You can take user field 5, for example, change the name of this label to whatever it is you want, and then use that field in a way that will help you get your job done. Speaking of field name changes, any one of the fields that you see here, in fact, any label throughout the whole application virtually, can be changed or customized based upon what you want to see. So let's say, for example, you don't want to use work order number, you can change that to ticket number, just as a general example. You can also set permissions at the field level on all of these fields. So again, let's say you want a certain set of people to be able to see requester full name, okay? Based on how you set up your roles and your rights, you can divide into groups those who get to see this field and those who do not. And you can also make these read-only or required. Again, very, very versatile system. Here you see the target. That would be either your asset you're working on, that'd be the machine, or the location. And then down below we have, again, very common in all areas of the program, free-form notes section. So this would be an example of that. All right. And kind of unique to our work order section, we also have an internal note. What this is for is, let's say you're acting as a service company for a group of people. You can actually set an internal note to yourself just based on customer feedback or notes that you don't necessarily want the customer to see. So let's say, for example, the customer is out. When I close this work order, I have the option of having a response sent to the person who requested it. That goes back to service request. So when I close this, they'll get notification of your notes, but not this internal note. This is just for you as a reference. Okay. And again, you can use as many or as little of these fields or functions as you wish. Tasks and labor, that goes back to our personnel here. So this would become the labor cost on your work order. We'll add Brian Scott. Just basically enter the number of hours they worked, the date that they finished, and save. You can add parts on the Parts tab. Keep in mind that if this came from a PM or a scheduled work order, this would be filled with any parts that were needed to complete that job. If it's a demand work order like this one, you're probably not going to know that till after you're done. So then you can come in here and add whatever parts are needed or parts that were used. Okay, and then that becomes your material cost. So let's say I'm finished with this now and I want to close it out because I don't want to see it anymore. What I can do is go back and close this out. I can actually do that right from here. If you look up in the right-hand corner, I have a button for complete and close, so I'll hit that, fill in the date for the completion date of the work order, and save it. So that tells the system that you're done with that work order and puts a copy of it down here in our closed work orders history. Okay, so there you see. This is going to contain a record of every single closed work order in the system since the beginning of time, essentially, though you do have the ability to purge it if you're not entirely sure, or if you don't need it. So that's kind of the cycle. A work order is generated either from a service request or activated from a work order master based on a schedule, comes into work orders. The work is then issued out to employees and completed. And then once the work is done, put in your parts, put in your labor, close it out, and that's it. You're good. So once these work orders are closed, the history of that cost is kept in one of two different places, actually three, I'm sorry. Either within your assets cost history, which I'll bring up here shortly. And here you can see the cost history of this particular asset. So so far as year-to-date totals, we spend $194 in demand maintenance. And the life-to-date totals, which is the entire life of the asset, you'll have, again, a full cost history of that. And we have something similar as well. Actually, it's pretty much identical to this in our locations. So if I were to come in here to locations, and I did a work order against a location, I would be able to see the cost history of that as well. Right. I do want to go into work order masters briefly here and just show you a little bit about that, at least show you how to create a schedule. So I'm going to hop in here, and work order masters are all the recurring work orders in the system. So it's very similar to what you see within the active work orders. You assign it a job number, and then fill in all the details that you want associated with this particular job. And when I'm ready, I'll go ahead and add the target, which is, in this case, we'll say it's an asset. Let's see what we have here. We'll choose that and click OK. And then you can go through and add the tasks, parts, and so on and so forth that you'd need to create this work order. Basically, since this is a master, you're going to want to fill out the parts list as much as possible because that's always going to show up then when this work order becomes active. Same thing with the tasks and labor. The tasks would be essentially line item duties that you can assign to this. I'll give you an example here. So this would be a task. It's part of a checklist. So when the technician gets this work order, they can go through this checklist, make sure they have all the tasks done, and then sign off on them. And there's also a way to break down the labor performed. All right, so once I have this created, hit the save button here. I filter it to find the one I just did. I can come in here and add a schedule. So I'm going to add a schedule to this. We'll call it a weekly. And we'll just set this to be every 2 weeks on Wednesday and save. And that's it. That's how you schedule a work order. And you see we have a lot of different options here. One thing we do have an option of is runtime as well. So if this is an asset where you'd want to capture usage as opposed to periods in time, you can set it up like that as well. So in that, a good example of that is if you're maintaining a vehicle, you want to do oil change every 3,000 miles, your unit would be miles and your runtime would be based upon that. So every 3,000 miles, we'll do this work order. So we'll start the counter at 3,000 and then say every 3,000 miles, activate this work order. So it's just an alternative way to schedule the work orders. And that is how we do that. And actually, it's looking like we're maybe getting a little close to our end time here. So I'll just quickly say that, again, going to our rights module here, you can set up these rights and roles in any way that you see fit. Here you can see there's about 15 different roles that are set up here. And using this function, you can control all aspects of the program. So we have a full rights matrix for every single area of the program where you can set read rights or none rights to almost everything within the program. There we go. So if I look at assets, for example, I can drill way down here all the way to the field level.